All right. Hello, everybody. Hablo castellano, pero no hoy. This tutorial is too difficult for my Spanish, and I'm too nervous. And there's a lot of code, so I'm going to speak in English, and you guys are going to get the translation. Tengo acá. Oh, see, I'm used to that, huh? So we have here also Andres Robalino, who's going to be playing. We'll do some live programming. If the live programming fails, we have everything in GitHub and we'll pull it out of the repository. Okay. Andres, do you want to say anything before I leap in and start going through the slides?
Nah, I mean, it's online. I was hoping if I could ask preference in the audience here who uses the most what language, but nah, voting and stuff, nah, so it's fine.
No. Well, yeah, let's go because it's in Java. We'll roll it with Java, and then there's a little Ruby gift at the end.
Yeah,
when we get there. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and do the little lecture part right now. I have to play controls on the. There we go. So good. This is my high technology presentation. I have a brand new, very cool sort of a tablet thing, but it doesn't sync very well. So I literally had to take photographs of it one at a time. We have an hour and a half, 2 sessions. And this is a very rare and happy opportunity for me to talk about hexagonal architecture and to have Andres here, who's going to do some live programming. Hexagonal architecture is also called ports and adapters. So we'll go over both of those. All right. I'm going to go straight into the technical aspect of this. The hexagonal architecture is based on 2 ideas. Really, these are the 2 that you have to have in front of you all of the time. The first is a play on the American Revolution. The people said somebody was famous for saying, "Give me liberty or give me death." And a programmer colleague of mine one time changed that, and he said, "Give me API or give me death." And I thought that summarized the hexagonal architecture just perfectly, and we were done. I mean, that's all you really need to know, is that there's only an API. And the thing that is over and over and over again is that your application should never touch the real world. It should never touch a network, should never touch a disk, never a database, never a user interface, should never touch the real world. Is protected by APIs on all sides. And when I say all sides, we'll get the hexagon. That's rule number 1. Now, historically, we have model view controller and model presenter, and that takes care of the user side. But on the database side, people still write straight to the database. They think the database is part of the system. We want to take it out. Okay, so never touch the real world. Give me API or give me death. The second thing is something that's not as well known, that I'll talk about for a moment, and I call it configurable dependency. So this is a pattern name. This is a generalization of dependency injection. So dependency injection is not a good pattern name as pattern names go, but it's well known. And the purpose of configurable dependency is you want to be able, in this case, to swap out your real world items easily. So we want to swap out a test harness for a UI, for a web, for whatever. We want to swap out a database for memory, for a RSS feed, for a whatever, that we want to always keep swapping out real world items. So you never touch the real world. You want to swap out the real world items, and that gives you everything. So if I go one more, so here's an app, and I drew the app as a hexagon. Now, why a hexagon? People go, why a hexagon? Because it's not the best name ever, right? It's got 2 names. hexagonal architecture, and ports and adapters. And that's historical. I wanted a shape that would allow, and I knew already back in like 1994, 1998, that you didn't want to have us like top down and left to right, and you had multiple facets. I didn't know what the facets meant at the time. I knew they had to be there. I wanted a shape that would allow multiple of these facets. So it couldn't be a square, couldn't be a triangle. Pentagons are really hard, and so it's a hexagon. It's a shape. Doesn't matter. We'll make use of the fact that it's a hexagon at some time, but it's just a shape. Then it took like, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 years. And one day when I was reading some other patterns, I realized, oh, these flat things, these facets are ports. And the point of a port is you can plug in different things. That's what a port allows you to do. And what you plug in are adapters to different real world items. And so that's where we get the name ports and adapters. So here's the configurable dependency. And what we see, there's an app, and I put it inside a hexagon. It's not going to touch the real world at all. And the point is that there are things that drive the app. I tend to draw them on the left side and on the top. And there are things that are driven by the app. Now, it turns out that there are two types of things that are driven by the app. The first are repositories or stores. And so I draw this round trip like hook arrow, because it means we're going to get information from that thing. And then there are other things that we notify, like you might notify a pager or a cell phone, or send a message like that. And so on the things that are driven by the app, we have repositories and notification items. And the thing is, you want to be able to change your drivers very rapidly, make some tests, make some UI, make some web. On the other side, we would start by putting an in-memory database or a stub or a mock, and then we want to swap it out and maybe grow it to a file-based repository or a database or something on the web. So this is new in this talk. I've talked about it once before in a previous video, but most people are not paying attention to this. And that's what is a port and how do we name a port. So a port is a reason for a conversation or an intention for a conversation. It's what we intend the conversation to be about. That's very important. It's not just one function call. It's all of the function calls, all of the service provided around a kind of a conversation. And so when you have an admin for a system, they will be responsible for setting up the system, adding users, changing passwords, changing user rights, doing something to the database. That conversation and all of the services get bundled up into one thing. And so that person might, you might have tests for them, you might have a UI, they might come in from the web, they might this, might that. But that's a set of conversations that all are around setting up the system. Now, your application typically will have some users, and they will be doing whatever they're doing. They'll be calculating prices. They'll be operating the system in general, and all of that goes into another intention or another group of back and forth that are around the purpose of the application. On the other side, you'll need to talk to the databases, the repositories, and you'll be getting tax rates. You might be controlling hardware. You might be notifying people. So the name of a port is a phrase that says for something, right? For calculating prices, for setting up. You see the structure of those words, and that goes straight into the code. Now, Andres and I were discussing to do this in Ruby or in Java. I happen to like Ruby, but Ruby doesn't give you this idea of a port very well as it does in Java. So the Java interface allows us to perfectly put in place this port with the for calculating prices and so on, and you'll see that. So we chose Java for that reason. So here's, we're going to look at, this is just there's only 3 apps that I'll ever talk about in this talk. This is a nice simple one. It's a coffee machine. I like the coffee machine. It's very simple. So there's one port, which is all the stuff about placing an order. And then I chose in this case that we're going to the repository of recipes, like how to make a cappuccino, how to make a latte, how to make a black coffee, how to make a whatever. We'll put those external to the app. And so there's another port that's for getting recipes. And then the one at the bottom is perfect because that's for controlling the dispensers. And then I added one more port that we would need for updating the software, doing diagnostics and so on. Now, what's interesting, although this is just a coffee machine, it turns out when you go to a hospital and they have the IV machines, an IV machine in a hospital actually looks the same as a coffee machine, right? So you've got the nurse doing things to run the machine. You've got things for monitoring the machine. You get instructions about the machine, and of course, you dispense chemicals into the IV. So that's the coffee machine. So there's an example where already it's useful that we have a hexagon, we have enough ports, and I want to say that ports tend to be kind of fat, right? They're oriented to a certain kind of usage like that. Now, so that we can get into the programming as quickly as possible, here's the app that we'll be doing today. We'll call it a price maker. And the price maker is going to just take in a price, look up in the data store what the tax rate is, calculate the tax amount, and give back the price. So it takes a value. So there's only two calculations in here. We'll say the tax amount is the value times the tax rate, and we'll say the price is the value plus the tax amount. Now, I want to be very clear. My intention in this talk is to show how simple this is. So we picked the simplest problem. Because when I look online at the blog articles and the people giving lectures, aside from not understanding what is a port, they make it look complicated. So we're going to make this the simplest code you could possibly make and show how easy it is to implement the hexagonal architecture. It'll go by so fast you won't even notice, and then we'll play with it. And all of the code will be on GitHub, so you can grab the code and play with it. In our price maker, so we have two interfaces only. We've got the one interface, which is for calculating prices, and that's going to be our user interface. And we put in there three functions for sort of evolution purposes. We have the first one, just echo a value. You put in a value, you just get the same value back out. That you'll see will be very good for testing and evolution purposes. Secondly, we're going to have a simple run out to the data store. So we'll just say, get the tax rate for a state, you pass in a state, you get back a tax rate. And then the final thing, which is calculate price with tax, and you give it a value at the state, and you run the two little bits of arithmetic, right? And then the system will go out to different tax rate stores. So we'll implement first the test harness on both sides, and then change the technology on the left side and change the technology on the right side. So here's the development sequence you're going to see. We'll just say slice number one. We're just going to say echo a value. We'll have a test harness, the app, it'll give back, right? At that moment, I want to be clear that the left side port has already been implemented. Many people think that you do the test before you implement the hexagonal architecture. But your first driver is the test harness. So at the moment you have your first test, you actually have already implemented the left side. Our second slice will be to go and get something from the in-memory store. So we'll have a test driving app, get something from the in-memory store. And I want to be very clear that at this moment, the right-hand side of the hexagon has already been done. We're finished. Actually, we're finished. From then on, we play. And we play, we can put in a UI here, file here, web here, database here, and so on. Just checking, and this is a bit lecture so far. Are there any questions from the audience? Can you write in the chat maybe? And I'll see, because I think that what we're going to do next is I'm going to turn off my screen share and let Andres turn on his screen share. I'm looking at the chat now. If anybody has a question, okay, Andres, if you hit the screen share, it's for you.
Okay. Okay. Se puede ver.
Sí.
Sí.
Sí, sí.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I got the screen sharing on.
It seems we have a question in the chat.
Let me look at the chat question. Let me see. What are the differences with TDD? Nice, easy question. I like easy questions. Thank you. You don't have to use TDD when you do hexagonal architecture. And this is very, very important. I want to make it very clear. The hexagonal architecture is a very small, very restricted pattern. It's not onion. It's not the clean, it's a subset, right? How you organize your domain on the inside with the app and your business. Where you put the adapters and what modules you put them in, your business. What's your development style, TDD, not TDD? Your business. It doesn't talk about that at all. So it's orthogonal. It happens that Andres and I both like to do the micro development in a TDD style. So we'll use that.
Thank you.
¿Para dónde se fue? Empezamos. Ok, sí pasamos ahora el enlace al repositorio. Alistair.
Yeah. Do you want to just start from a clean everything, or do you want to pull in the?
I could use the same thing, but just implement it as called something else. Maybe changing a letter or something, but in separate files, maybe.
Yeah, I'm game.
All right.
That. So make a new repo completely and do everything from zero.
No, I meant this is the project, right?
Yeah.
We have source code.
Yeah.
Tests. We would add this, but just a different one.
How about just can you just bring in slice one? Slice one is so tiny. Can we just like be super fast typists literally by pulling it in from GitHub? And then we can, it's so little code. We can show it and then run the tests and change something.
Okay,
and run the test, even fail or something like that.
I think I broke something.
That always happens on live programming shows.
This is unexpected.
It's always that way, man. That's why we have this stuff stored.
Let me check.
Hey, I have a question, Andres. Oh, I could probably do it. I could put the URL of the repo in the chat, and people who want to go and peek ahead at the code can go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I think I deleted the whole thing, to be frank.
UMF.
Well, we're just gonna start from scratch then, and the source code is online, so I think, yeah.
What do you mean the source code is online?
Let me paste it in the chat. The
Sorry.
repository.
Yeah, put that link in.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
I think what I try to do is that I try to check out to the first slice in the commits, but I probably deleted or messed something up because there are things that are not checked in, you know. So I probably broke something. I don't know. Let me find.
Can you put that GitHub thing in the chat for people?
Yeah, I'm looking for the chat. I'm trying to find it
On your screen. It's at the bottom of your Zoom.
I can't see it. Wait.
Well, strangely enough, I just happen to have it in my PowerPoint. So strangely enough, I'm just going to put it in the chat right there. So I did it. All right, anybody can go and look at that github.com, Alan Rocco Bernlino.
Okay, there.
So that's in the chat, so you can skip with that. So anybody is welcome to go ahead and look at that repo now. And if you're a Java code reader, you can read ahead and see everything that's going to happen. You know, like some people like to do that.
Okay, I recovered it, I think. Let me just run the test, see what's up. That was scary. Well, not really, but yeah. Okay, they all pass. It's fine. I'm just gonna create a new file.
Can we just look at the test code before you create anything new?
I was gonna write the test actually.
Okay, roll it.
Let's call it price maker ho, or
Ho.
it begins with ho.
Got it.
All right, that's cool. Tests. It's easier.
I'm with you.
No, I'm not interested. Okay. Let's just write a test. Let's create our first adapter, whatever. Sorry for wasting time. So it should, for our first test.
So all we want for the first test is that the app echoes a value, right? So the function is going to be called echo value. It takes one argument and it just passes it back. So I like the number 100. So if you can say, right, what do? You say, by the way, you have a typo. Your
Yeah. Oh my God, I hate programming. I hate it.
Okay, so let's do this.
Let me rename. Let me just make sure here. Blah 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, sorry.
2 days, no sleep, and a little bit of pressure. Okay. So price maker app, new price maker. All right. Good.
Okay, and I want to search.
Now we're doing a search. Should that app dot echo value 100 produce. I remember yesterday we had some trouble with the floats and the strings and the stuff. What is it you're gonna do? Is that going to be a string or an int or what?
I have no idea. Let's just make it. Let's make it a string. Do we make it a string? Nah, right. Just a plain value.
Let's see what we get. All right. So for the TDD hardcore, you would run that and it would fail because the code hasn't been written yet. But I think we can, as we say, take that under advisement and believe it would fail. So maybe we just go to the app and create a function called echo value.
An int, right?
We did an int yesterday and we got into trouble. Do you want to just go ahead and make that a float right now?
I guess double.
Yeah, and they don't like doubles, but all right. That's it. We're good, right? Boom, run it.
I'm thinking. Yeah, I guess it would cast it by its.
Okay,
I don't know. Let's run it. See what's up.
run it.
Oh, it failed. Expected 100 was 100.0. Okay, we got it passing.
Good. Now can I file my complaint?
Yeah,
Can
sure.
you go back to the app, please? We didn't implement the interface. So
Oh, yeah, it's a concrete class.
take it
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's okay. We got the thing. We have a hello world. That's fine. But now let's get official about it and make our interface.
Interface name.
For calculating prices.
Or calculate. Oh, right.
Yep.
So we don't,
Well, does it matter? Yeah. Okay. Fine.
because we have source code that it might interfere with the naming. So same thing.
And for now, we're just going to put it inside the same file just for convenience, and then refactor it out later and do it wherever we decide to do. I think we leave it in here. It's the adapters that go out. So if you could be so kind and put it up at the top before the class so I get to see the...
One second. Give me 1 minute. Where's, I think the class is here. Here it is. I'm sorry, I was thinking. What did you say? ¿Qué dijo?
Can you put the interface definition at the top before the... Oh, there you go. It's right there. I'm sorry, you have it. I'm behind. Got it. Got it. And then you have to make the class so it implements...
It's refactored already by the IDE, so it's already implemented.
I'm with you. And so now you have to say price class, price maker, and the app, please, has to say implements the interface. I'm running way behind you, man. I'm so far behind you. Thank you. So we're good?
Yeah.
Are we? So pause right here. Can you show us the test code? This is the test code. And in the test code, we don't have to make use of the interface at this moment, right? Our test code does not need to declare that it's going to do anything with that interface. Is that true or false? What I just said. Andres, are you there?
Oh, you're asking me a question. I thought it was for the audience. What was the question again?
I can't talk to them. No. Do we need the do we need any reference to the interface here in the test code?
I mean, no, I don't think so. No.
All right. Cool. Cool. So this is the point. Is that's the left side of the hexagon has been implemented, right? Now, can you show the interface again, please?
Sure.
And there's going to be three functions in there. And that public interface will have the echo value, will have get tax rate per state, it'll get calculate prices with tax. So that's going to grow to have three functions in it. And if you look at the app itself, please. Right, and so we've got that it implements the interface and then just the thing. So we run it. Do we run it?
Yeah, the tests.
Yep. Okay, good. So that's the end of the first slice. What we did, do you want to go ahead and push it to GitHub, or do you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, sure.
We can just grow this one and they can look at the other ones. That's fine.
Right. It's the same. Never mind.
Yeah. Let's just go for the second slice. Now, the second slice, we're going to implement an in-memory data store. And I can't remember what we called it yesterday.
In-memory tax rate
Store.
Store, yes. And our test should be should get the tax rate for a state.
Correct. Actually, what I wrote was, because we were going to hard code it, I said, should give 6% for Florida.
Right. Should. All right. Why Florida? No, I'm kidding.
Give 6% for Florida.
Whoops.
Okay. Yep. Good. Right. And now we have to create an in-memory tax rate store and pass in the name of that into the test. So we're going to presume that there will be one, right? So it's going to be price maker app equals new price maker HOA, and you're going to go in-memory store, right? Yep. Exactly. Yep. And then we're going to do assert that. What are we going to say? It's going to be called get tax rate for state, but it's fine. Call it tax rate for state's fine. I'm okay with either name.
Java people are with gets.
Yeah.
Tax rate. Well, Java programmers or whatever. Sorry, get tax rate
for state, and then FL.
So we want to assert that this is equal to 6%, right?
Yeah, 6.00. Right, got it. Now that should fail twice because the tax rate store has never been created and the tax rate function, get tax rate, has never been implemented. So we'll assume that'll fail. We don't have to run it. What do you want to do? Do you want to create the tax rate store first, that class.
I don't want to. Thinking.
The in-memory tax rate store implements the interface called for getting tax rates.
Yes.
So we want to go ahead and create the class.
Let me do it here.
Right, implements. Can you say also that it implements?
Sure.
You need to be a better citizen and getting the interface in there right away.
How should we call the? I forget the.
For getting tax rates. For getting tax rates.
Oh, right, right.
Right, and it's got a function, whatever you called it. I think you just called it get. The function just says get tax rate. Or get tax rate for state as a case. Yeah, that's fine. There you are.
For state.
Yep, for state. If we're going to be official about it, people are watching. Okay. There you go.
Second. Just in case.
Right, and it's going to implement a function called get tax rate for state, and it's just going to return 0.00 double. Return 6.00. Right. Good, good, good. All right. So for everybody who's watching, we have now implemented the port. Okay. With a nice, simple, hard-coded thing in memory. And so now if we run it, it would fail because set text store doesn't exist and our function doesn't exist. So we need to go back to our app. Right, so for the people who's watching, what he's doing right now, that's the dependency injection right there. It's basically, you just pass in a parameter and say what the store is going to be. So the text, and so that's, when we get done with this, we'll have it all done. And then you just swap out, you just call it with whatever you want. We'll have a tax, in-memory tax rate store, we'll file-based tax rate store, database file, you know, whatever. I like to make it go out to the user interface so I can fake the database with my fingers.
What's going on? Ah, my bad. My bad. You have to move this out.
Right.
Let me just, put it.
Someone wrote, no tan veo como small talk. And again, we chose Java because it illustrates the use of the interfaces, right? So in Smalltalk and Python and Ruby, you don't notice it. So I didn't notice it for the first bunch of years because I tend to write in languages like Python, Ruby, and Smalltalk. But we chose Java just for this at the moment.
Tax rate.
There's a question on chat. I don't know if you'd like to answer it now or later.
Which one? The one from Daniel Nunez? How do you think about foreign collective code ownership and modeling? You know, these are questions that are like personal opinion. So this, like, I always like to be honest. There's times when I trust my answer, and there's times when I don't trust my answer. So if I don't trust my answer, I can give a loose opinion, but then, you know, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer it. There are two questions inside of that question from Daniel, system metaphor and collective code ownership. Kent Beck in the 90s went from saying, tell me what are the main 3 classes in the system, or the main 4 classes in the system, and seeing if everybody would get the same answer. And if they didn't, then they didn't have a shared idea of what they were building. And I've made use of that when I do drawings of systems these days, the class diagram or the domain diagram. I take a fat pen and I draw big fat lines around the main 3 or 4 classes, because everything is an outgrowth of those. So he did that, and that was sweet. And then a couple of years later, he made it even tighter and said there must be one metaphor. And that never worked. He tried and tried and tried to get metaphor to work in extreme programming. And it's too hard. There aren't enough metaphors. Historical thing, they were at the C3 project and it was cars, so they used the manufacturing line. But Ron Jeffries knows that that's a universal machine, a data flow thing. So metaphor didn't work, but if you keep asking people, what are the main 3 classes that you could drive this whole system from? There's that. Collective code ownership is like, to me, is like food in the refrigerator in an apartment building. The big question is who gets to throw something out? So everybody adds. If you have collective code ownership, everybody adds. But the question is who gets to delete? And if you don't know who gets to delete, then the thing just becomes a big mess. So you have to have rules around who gets to delete. But I'm paying attention to Andres here for a moment. What you got there? Where are we?
I was passing the test. I think I passed it, but I'm not done yet because this is concrete. This needs to be part of the ports of the 3 functions of the calculating prices. So we did a driven port.
Wait, let me catch up because I always run behind you. You're in tests now, right?
Right. So this passes right now, right? We have the.
Hang on, okay. I'm reading. I'm slow. Price maker app is new. Okay, app set tax rate store. Got that. Double tax rate equals app. There you go. Tax rate. Get tax for state. Yes. Assert that. This is that. Good. Now, can we look at the app so I can see what that's looking like? There we go. Did you augment the interface definition? Where's the interface definition?
That's what I meant. For getting tax rates.
No, yeah. The interface.
Yes, for the driven port. Yes.
Interface. Yeah, we need to have get tax rate for state. What happened to the other one? No.
That's what I meant. We have to.
Go to the main hexagon. Where is your interface called for calculating prices, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Right here.
Right there, yeah.
We have to add it here. That's what I meant. So, whoop. Oh, sorry. Let me just, grab this stuff.
That's what I get for
sorry about that.
Wow, doing code. So it's been 45 minutes, just a time check. So after we do this, I vote that, well, we'll just take a look. We might take some questions. Okay, let's see here. So we have, you're going too fast for me. Hold still. Interface for getting tax rates. That's the one off the right-hand side. Get tax rate for state, in-memory tax store, double got it. Price maker, okay. Implements for getting prices. Okay, got it. Can you show me a bit more of the code there in the class, public class price maker, HOA? I can't see what it says there. There's the whole app. Perfect. Private for getting tax rates. There's a tax rate store. That's the dependency injection right there. We've got echo value. That's our previous one. Still good. Public void set tax rate store. That's the dependency injection. And then there's the thing get tax rate for state. Boom, done. Okay. And you've run the test?
Yes.
All right. So I want to be clear. Here's the point. As far as I'm concerned, we could stop this lecture now. We've done everything. Everything we do from here on is playing. We have an interface on the left-hand side with two functions on it. That's the port for calculating prices. We've implemented the port for getting tax rates, and we have an in-memory. We've got dependency injection, and so we can play with both sides. Good. If we go to a third slice, I would want to add, instead of changing the UI, I would want to add the third function, which is get tax rate for state, which is the purpose of the app, quite frankly. So when you get ready and you feel you want to do that, give it a shout.
Oh,
Somebody's calling me from Australia. I'm sorry, person from Australia. Hello.
Just
Oh, gee, I got a call from Australia selling me something about Visa credit cards. That's amazing. That's a new low for spam calls. Okay, good. So I'm going to look at the question because you can run on ahead. Shout out if you want a reminder of what to call things, what you're factoring right now. Gonzalo asks the question, are we using Java interfaces to model the API of the Hexagon? I believe that's true. And as not a master Java programmer, I'm always like careful. But we have a conceptual model, as I showed you before, with the Hexagon and the ports. And there are people, I think, who make one port equals one function call. And then you end up with as many ports as you have function calls. And I don't think you've gained anything, right? You didn't save a whole lot. You just added a lot of complexity. So my preferred way is to make ports kind of fat, right? There's basically a user with a usage, and all of the things about that usage go into one port. And then when you swap the technology, you swap the technology for all of that user, right? So you have ports for, like, as I say, for web or direct UI or test. And the nice thing about Java is that the Java interface definition is the perfect match in the concrete programming world for the conceptual idea of a port. So when you say, are we using Java interfaces to model the API, the API is just the signature, the set of functions that it offers. That's the API. Let's say you have 20 or 30 or 100 functions you offer. Your API definition will have 20 or 30 entries, one for each function. But you might bundle all of those into one port, to one interface definition, Java interface definition. And then both people can see it. It's collected. The intentionality of the system, the intention of the system is clear. And when you swap technology, they all swap at the same time, right? So there's a little bit different. It is a model of the API, but it's not a straight model of like every function call in the API. Thank you. That was a very important question. Let's see if I can catch up with Andres now.
Yeah, I'm about to write the next test.
Good. So the next function we want, the next test is called should add tax to value. So we called it. Should add tax to value, maybe with a small s at the beginning. Could be good. Yeah. And then it's going to take yeah, that's the test. And then you can copy down from the previous one if you want. We got a price maker app. We're going to have an in-memory tax store. We're going to have Good. And now we're going to say double price equals app dot get tax. Sorry, calculate price with tax. Calculate price with tax.
So for what price? 100?
Yeah, let's do 100. I'm lazy. It's the only number so everybody knows I can only do simple math, so I always do 100. People put in funny numbers and then you can't calculate it.
Should be 100.
106.00 because
What's that?
106.00. Yesterday when we were practicing, we used a tax rate of 6.85, but I looked it up in the meantime, and Florida is 6%. All right, so now we have to implement that. Let's put it first thing into the interface, if you would be so kind, before putting it into the app.
Having a new keyword, sorry.
It's not an int price, please. It's a double. You're still writing int price when it's a double. In the interface definition. Yeah. By the way, for the people who are watching this, there are a very limited number of people in the world that I will do this with, because live programming when things go wrong is really tough. Now, I did this in Paris with Thomas Pirin, and that was great. And this is the second time that Andres has done live programming with me. It's been really a pleasure to find that both Thomas Pirin and Andres have the same development style as I do, micro slices, TDD, the naming conventions. We've never had a fight about naming conventions or approaches. So this is really cool for me. And a shout out to Andres for handling this. Okay, here we're.
I need some help with the math. So anyway.
Yeah. Now, hang on, where are we? Yeah. Public double, calculate price with tax rate. Get tax rate for state, yes. No. Can you make it two slices, two sentences, please, as we had it before? We're going to do tax amount is tax rate times value times tax rate over 100. I got you covered here, and I've caught up now. Sorry, tax amount. Your first sentence, tax amount, not tax rate. Yeah. Tax amount is price times get tax rate for state divided by 100. Cool. And then a price, so double price equals. Your word price is wrong. Can you change the parameter? It's supposed to be value, not price. Yep. And then in the first sentence, it's price also. Nope. Go up one. Tax amount. Come on, right there. Tax amount equals value. Yeah, value times. Good. And then price is value plus tax amount. Value plus tax amount. Sorry, it took me all to catch up. Because I was busy saying hi to Pablo in the chat instead of watching you. I think that's good. Can we, we've got the implemented in the interface. We got that. Should be good. Let's run it. Run it out.
Passing.
Now, I love to make things fail. So can you go back to the test? I don't like it when the tests always pass. It makes me super suspicious. Can you make it expect an answer 6.85? 106.85. Just change the expected and then run it again. Right, and then right. So I'm just like cynical like that. If everything is always passing, I just get really uncomfortable. So go ahead and change it back to 106.00 now, if you'd be so good. All right, now that's 3 slices. We have our app. What I want to do is to talk about this a bit, but my question for you, Andres, given it's been 1 hour, we have a limited time. If you had your preference to make a command line interface at this moment, or to make a file-based data store at this moment, which would you prefer to do if we only have time to do one?
To be honest, I would, I mean, I could drive it out, like meaning continue constructing it, but both of them will take their little bit of time. But I recommend, because it's purely, annoying coding thing. So we could just, because we have the source code of those here, we could go over them and explain applying it.
Yeah, why don't you do that? That'd be cool. Can you pull those in?
So let's do Cly.
Right. Are you going to pull it in from the GitHub now then, as opposed to coding it live? Just show what it looks like. What I'm saying is, if you do live coding, we have time for 1 more slice, not 2 more. So we can't.
No, I'd rather show more because you get to see how we play around with the hexagon and
Good.
how we swap things.
Good.
So
can I take over? Can I take over the screen for about 5 minutes while you get all that set up and you get prepped? And I'm going to show an example of a more complicated system. It's the last kind of technical slide I have.
Okay, but let me first say, we're writing all these classes and they're ending with HOA, right? But we also have the other classes that we had from the repository, and they're here.
You can show it right now. You can just show it right now.
That's why yeah, exactly. That's why there is no conflicts, right? That's why it works.
Show it.
We can apply it like right now, the Cly implementation. We just use it because it has a different name.
All right, what would you like? I'm not understanding what you would like to do.
Here's the Cly app.
To show it, right?
Yeah.
All right, good. Stop.
I'll stop.
Thank you. Class main, public, static, void, mumble, string, mumble, stuff. Price maker hex equals new price maker hex set tax rate store in-memory tax rate store Cly app UI Cly app hex. Let's go. Right, that's the active bit. There's nothing else in that file that's like really interesting for anybody. It's just Java stuff to deal. Can you run that?
Yeah, sure.
We'll run it then.
Yeah, because we have 3 ways to do stuff with the application. We could either echo the value. If it's a command line, you do echo value past 500. Let's run that one.
Yeah, let's do echo value. Let's do that. Why not? Let's step it through.
I'm gonna run it.
Yeah.
So the output is el precio es $500.
Okay, good.
And what echo does, as we already did our first slice, is return that same value.
Yeah, sure, we got it. Let's do the next one. Can we do get tax rate for state?
For Florida, yeah, which is
Florida, so let's be good citizens about it.
Let's run it. That's right. La tasa de impuesto es 6.85%.
Right, and for the viewers, that's because. Now wait, is it using? That's our using our other in-memory.
Correct. We pass our newest one.
Yeah. Oh, look at you. Go, man.
Wait.
Not that easy, because you have to put HOA everywhere.
Exactly. No, it's not. We could add an adapter of an adapter, but no, it's not recommended. So let's just.
No, don't go there.
I don't want to break any tests. But anyway, we also have here, because this is the original one we have, right? Which is right here. The same stuff. Here's hard coded. You know what? Let's change it.
No. Okay. All right. As you wish.
Let's run the test. Let's see what's it's running.
It's gonna fail. No, look, man, you're gonna break too many things. I'm watching the clock. Sorry, Andres. I'm watching the clock. Yeah. Hey, can you run the function with one more? Do the calculate price with tax function for me, please.
Yes.
Of course, the tests fail, and that's why I didn't want you to do it.
Yeah, but the fix is easy. Watch.
I don't. Yeah. Hey, I'm just watching the clock because the stuff I want to say and the stuff you want to say.
Right. I'm running the program.
Got it. Do one more, and let's make it.
What am I doing?
Tax Florida 106. I'm just curious what it's going to say the tax rate is because we've got two different tax rates in there.
I should have listened to you. I think I broke something.
Yeah, take out anything that said HOA and whatever you were doing.
No, I did something. I don't know what exactly.
Was it in the test code? Show me your CLI app because you stuck in a HOA at the end of something. Where's your CLI app?
Oh no, it's I know what happened. This is no longer called like this. I forgot to change this. It's called tax rate. Sorry, my bad. So what we did, yeah, it's my bad.
So for the people who are watching, we practiced this 2 nights ago, and this thing that we're doing inside of about, like 1 hour or 45 minutes took us about 2 hours because we really were debating everything. So it didn't go at the speed.
Yeah, that's what.
Debated everything. All right, good deal.
That's why I wanted to test also, but that's out of scope.
Can you show them? Yeah, now it's really good. Show them the file store because you've got that sitting there.
Sure. So we have another one that implements the same port, the driven port for retrieving tax rates. Es el otro puerto que implementamos para sacar los impuestos. Entonces, esto le da un archivo. O sea, estos detalles realmente no importan porque solo le da un archivo.
To the unimportant things. There's a file. Everybody knows. There's a file.
Nada de esto es importante. Esto solamente lo que hace es construir lo que viene de un archivo que está acá. O sea, yo literalmente puedo agregar otro Utah.
No, that's good, man. It's good.
Sí, yo literalmente puedo agregar, pero el punto es que este puerto, en vez de que sea en memoria, como hemos estado haciendo, lee de este archivo, ¿ya? Y lo llamamos file tax rate store, ¿ya? Y si vamos a la aplicación de la línea de comandos, simplemente lo que haríamos es decir file tax rate store, que así se llama, y si ejecutamos ese programa pasando Florida, tiene que dar lo mismo.
Let's go. Because I already know what I'm going to do to you next. Okay.
I know what you're going to do.
What I'm going to do is change the tax rate in the file store so it gives a different answer. Can you change the tax rate in that file?
Sure.
Well, make it 7. Just what the hell? 7, no, a different number. I want a different number. 7.00. Yeah. Now run it, and then we're just proving that we're really going command line interface to file.
There's the output.
107, right? So this is the illustration, and I'm going to pause again here because this is the thing I want to make. The point is it's easy. That it did not take a lot of code, right? We had to actually create the interfaces, right, and pay attention to that. But it's a function call on this side and a parameter passing, ordinary parameter passing on this side, and we're done. And you just saw we switched over to the command line into a file. Now, Andres, do you want to show what you did with hooking it to Ruby? Because that was really sweet. Your funny little web.
Bueno, lo fundamental es que, o sea, para entender, si a alguien le interesa en español, si es que a alguien le interesa.
Just run the, can you just run the web thing?
Yeah, sure. Let me think. Ok, bueno, si vamos a la web, está hecho de hecho en otro lenguaje, está en Ruby.
And don't explain the whole too much about it again. So Ruby allows you to run Java code, and what Andres did was just for fun. He had a Ruby thing calling on the app, the Hexagon written in Java, and going to the web. And this is kind of fun because it's now showing the program connections.
Básicamente, sorry. So, pero es lo, o sea, esta es la aplicación web, pero es lo mismo, es el Hexagon, el Price Maker, que es lo que hemos estado implementando, que este es el que implementa todos los puertos, solo que en Ruby, yo estoy usando algo que se llama JRuby, que es un bridge de Ruby y Java, pero esto es una clase realmente de Java, pero usada en Ruby. Y aquí estoy haciendo un nuevo store que simplemente lee JSON, es otro puerto hecho por mí, que simplemente lee, implementa la interfaz Getting Tax Rates, que es la que estuvimos hablando para las tarifas, las tasas, instancio eso con el Hexagon, y esto es específico al framework que se llama Sinatra para procesar consultas online, entonces a través de HTTP. Entonces yo ahora lo que hice fue instanciarlo y ya está corriendo. Y básicamente es lo mismo, solo que a través de la web, usando el hexágono. Entonces, si yo hago así, creo que era tax rate de Florida, o sea, es similar, solo que es otra interfaz. Te dice, Berlino se llama la aplicación. Te dice 6.85, que ese es el valor de Florida. Y la tasa de impuesto en Florida es 6.85%. O sea, si te dice el otro caso, porque son tres, que era ECO, creo que era, ECO 500, te dice eso, o sea, es 500 y el precio es $500. Y no me acuerdo cómo se llamaba la otra, creo que se llamaba así. Price with tax rate. Entonces, si decimos acá el precio de $100 para Florida, no lo sé. Ahí está. Pero todos usan el hexágono y de hecho lo hace a través lo lee de JSON de otra cosa distinta, o sea que está acá. O sea, yo voy a agregar, no sé, un estado, Utah, 5%.
Yeah, why not?
No sé, me invento. No sé si esté leyendo, ya está en memoria o si debo reinstanciarlo, pero ¿qué estado puse? Utah.
All right, good. Okay, let's pause there. If you're good, I think we got the juice out of the program.
Okay. It's not. It's the reason is that you need to reboot the server to pick up the changes.
That's okay. I'm wanting to be done and
Right.
allow this conversation.
All right, cool.
Good. Can you relinquish the screen share and I'll take over the screen share?
Yes.
Boom. All right. Very good. So the only other thing that I wanted to show here is a larger application of this. So this is really the application where I got serious about this. I have a friend, Mo, and he had this weather system, and he built it so that there was, if you look at the bottom left side with all the little arrows coming in, the second word is telemetry. So he had a weather warning system in Colorado, but with subscribers all over the country, and to warn them about hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, all them, and it would take telemetry information in from the Weather Bureau, and then it would send out, it would send out a pager to the people's pagers, the subscribers, and warn them if there was a storm coming in their area. And then later he had to make it so it would work with the old-fashioned voice answering systems, right? And so on. And he had hard coded all of this stuff, right? So he had a UI for his admin person to enter in new subscribers. He had hard coded a telemetry. He had hard coded a database, and he had hard coded that he was going to be going to pagers and telephones. And he was describing to me that he was suffering because as he was adding new technologies on the collecting weather information side, he was going to have to multiply all combinations and permutations of technology and have a telemetry input and an RSS input, separate programs, and a pager thing, and a telephone thing, and a voice recording thing. And then there was a web interface coming in, and then he wanted to make program to program. And he literally was dying. Okay, this was back in the 90s. And I just looked at him like I don't understand why you're having difficulty, because he wasn't believing in the sentence, give me API or give me death, right? That's the sentence you have to hang on to. If you put APIs around everywhere, then you don't care. Your first driver for the admin is always going to be a test case, and then you add the user interface. And that's fine. Your first driver for the weather monitoring is a test case. And then you add optionally adapters for telemetry, RSS, web, programs, whatever. And then your outputs, you don't care. You always notify out to a test harness, of course, in memory, some capturing logging thing. And then telephones, pagers, voice recordings, web systems, you don't care. And your database, then you always have an in-memory database for when things break, because I've been on projects and the database breaks and all the programmers are shut down. And I go, can you give me a way to simulate the database just from memory and I can continue programming? And they say no. And I go, don't do that, right? So this one was very interesting because he had 4 ports, and this is where the hexagonal shape starts to come in useful, right? So he had for administering the system, for collecting weather information, for notifying customers, and for getting the customer data out. I wanted to show that because that's a real system. And then I think that's actually about it. Some of you, I can copy those things down into the chat, but I can't do it while I'm talking. But you guys could take a screen snapshot or something and type them in. The original article I wrote is still online, alastair.coburn.us/hexagonal architecture. There's a version of a video that I did in Paris with Thomas Pirin. It's called Alastair in the Hexagon, and that's a nice 30-minute version, and there's a bit more history in that one, and then Thomas takes over the coding. Juan Manuel Garrido de Paz in Spain, in Huelva, has written some articles and a blog, and he has GitHub, so you can read about that. He's been really working very hard on getting everything exactly correct. Thomas Pirin has written a number of blog articles, and then there's the GitHub repo. So that's the end of the slide sharing that I'll do. I can stop share and go back to the main video. We have 10 minutes left. And wondering if there are questions, and I'll be back in just one split second. And if you have a question, make the question at Andres for 1 minute.
Yo soy feliz mientras nadie pregunte nada. Chat.
So what I wanted to do, this is a shout out to Juan Manuel Garrido de Paz, because he lives in a city in Spain called Huelva. I don't know if anybody here is from Huelva. And he made me this custom shirt from using the Huelva. And you see it says Alastair, and it has the number 6 for the hexagonal architecture. And HOA. And he sent this to me when I was in Colombia, and his poor shirt was chasing me around as I was moving from city to city. And I had to pick it up at the bus station. They sent it by bus. But anyway, this is a shout out to Juan Manuel Garrido de Paz, and a thank you for all of his work and his t-shirt. Okay, we have still some time left. Any questions from anybody?
Please use the chat for your questions.
No? Okay. Andres, Mr. Joaquim, sir, you are the guilty party for this. You must have something you want to say.
I want to ask you, what is the most complex implementation of this that you have seen?
Well, the one I just showed you.
Just that one?
What, with 4 ports and about 20 pieces of technology hanging off of it? How complicated are you looking?
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't see, also bear in mind, I don't see a lot of code these days, right? People don't go around.
No, of course.
And showing me their code. And if they did, I wouldn't look at it because I can't read all that stuff. I can't be reading all that code.
And what the other question is, what do you think that this pattern that you write time ago now is everywhere? Everyone is talking about this. And I know that your blog post about this was like taking your website down. No, that was the history. Yes.
It never took it down, but I'll tell you, it became more popular than all of my use case articles for sure. So, no, but I have a question for you, Andres, because you've been to many lectures and articles about hexagonal architecture, and so I gave my version, right? What do you see as the difference between the way I do this and maybe some other people do? That would be interesting.
Well, yes, some of them, I think they misunderstood the meaning of ports and adapters, and they exchange the things, these concepts. So that was what I see. You remember in the session in last year in the Agile event, the guy was mixing these concepts. I think this example is a really simple examples that show what do you want to mean. I don't know if the English expression is good. So I like the example because it's simple and all the concepts are really clear for me, at least for me. And so I was asking the last question because I know that a lot of people connect this with microservices. Maybe Andres want to add something about this, the relationship about microservices and hexagonal architecture.
¿Estás preguntando a mí?
Sí. Si ves alguna relación entre el tema, todo el surgimiento de microservicios y la conexión con...
Odio los microservicios y me haces esa pregunta, hombre. Nada, hombre, o sea, básicamente, o sea, todas las arquitecturas, particularmente la hexagonal, se trata de separar cosas y que sean agnósticas de la una con la otra. Y principalmente es ver la manera de que no te afecte algo que tengas que cambiar en otras partes. Punto. Eso es todo. Entonces, el problema con los microservicios es jugar con el mundo del dominio. Entonces, lo que ahí ya tienes que hacer, pues, si estás haciendo una arquitectura hexagonal, tendrías ya que pensar desde un punto de vista de que piensas ya que todos los microservicios son sus hexágonos propios, con sus propias responsabilidades. O sea, más bien para mí, es algo como... como seguir ciertas, ¿cómo se dice? ¿Cuál es la palabra? Ciertas cosas que te benefician a largo plazo, porque dicen mucho en microservicios que no, que vas a terminar con un servicio anémico, que bla, 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 y que no sirve de nada el microservicio y termina siendo un problema. Y es exactamente por esa razón, o sea, no se sabe, no se conoce muy bien del business domain como para aislar todas las responsabilidades orientadas al microservicio en particular que trabaja en orquestación con las demás. Entonces ahí es donde la gente se está perdiendo, prácticamente. Y es que en software todo cambia y realmente es imposible así saber de antemano cómo van a ser las cosas. Pero te defiendes con estas cosas. Y si tú entiendes bien cosas como la arquitectura hexagonal, si tú entiendes bien que gracias a los lenguajes estáticos que te obligan a respetar las interfaces y sabes muy bien que si tienes una vaina por allá o por la otra, se te hace un problema, que en los 90 te dabas cuenta porque los tiempos de compilación sí eran mucho más altos, que eso hoy ya no hay casi nunca, entonces ya no se ve tanto ese costo, ¿me entiendes? Quizás se respeta menos por eso, pero es eso es lo que yo pienso.
Bien.
Entonces,
Okay.
si hablas de la arquitectura hexagonal con microservicios, yo te voy a decir, o sea, porque tú puedes hacer tu propio hexágono como tú quieras, tú puedes tener 100.000 puertos si tú quieres, o solamente 2. Ni la una ni la otra es lo ideal, sino un punto medio. Pero es tu problema ahí, cómo te manejas y cómo haces un aislamiento de las cosas donde se deberían de cambiar. Y el configurable dependency, como harías también.
Yeah.
So there was a good question that showed up saying who has used this, and I didn't put it in the references because I didn't think of it in time, but maybe somebody can Google it really fast and put it in the chat. Netflix used the hexagonal architecture and wrote a lovely long article about how using hexagonal architecture allowed them to migrate a very major and dangerous migration easily. Can somebody like Google that super fast and see if I don't want to flip the screen and start Googling things while we're on here, but somebody can do that and find it and put it in the chat. And I want to say, because hexagonal architecture is really built on these two sentences, right? Give me API or give me death, and configurable dependency. And what, as far as I'm concerned, the thing that saved them was the give me API or give me death bit, right? They put APIs around everywhere. And when you have APIs, that protects you, and then you can play the dependency injection, configurable dependency game like you want. There you go. Thank you very much for finding it. Ready for changes with hexagonal architecture. So read that, because they had a very serious situation, a very dangerous, scary moment. They did this. They were able to swap out and migrate forward to a different technology base. And then they wrote this lovely article about that. So, hey guys, it's 25 minutes after. It's been a long hour and a half. I'm sure everybody is ready to go. You have the GitHub code. You've got the Netflix article. You have this very simple example to play with. So I guess we could say goodbye, right?
Gracias, Alistar. Gracias, Andrés, por el esfuerzo.
Gracias.
Thank you
Muchas
so
gracias.
much.
Oh,
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye. Thank you for
somebody that I know.